Sean, maybe Sean goes while
Yeah,
Mauricio.
Sean. Yeah, Sean, why don't you, while we're figuring this out, why don't you, and then Mauricio, just chime in when you can.
I'll hang up my tech support hat, put on my shark hat. Hey guys, this is Sean Heinrichs, filmmaker, photographer, conservation storyteller by trade. I've spent more than the last 2 decades on the front lines, a lot of it undercover, in doing shark investigations, exposing what's happening in some of the most horrific places for sharks in the world, 10,000 sharks being landed in Casanuma, Japan, Ecuador, other parts of South America, Taiwan, facilities processing 50,000 fins a day, bringing those stories to the world so that they can't hide what we're doing. My journey with sharks was an interesting one. I was born in Durban, South Africa, and my first exposure to sharks was in the freezer rooms of the Sharks Ford, where they literally had these massive sharks every day piled up in these rooms that they were taking out of the shark nets that were meant to protect people. And a lot of my classmates were gawking at them and like, wow, that's so cool. And I just remember something inside of me was like, this is so wrong. It just did not resonate with me. And the sharks were a lot bigger. The blue sharks were 3-4 meters back then. Now they're 2. All the bronzies were at least 3.5-4 meters. These were all massive sharks. And for a 6-year-old, something shifted in me, and I didn't know what to really do with it. I sort of went my way in life. I tried to do a business career for a while, but no matter what, the ocean just kept calling me back. And eventually, it was in the 90s, late 90s, when I started seeing more and more of what was happening with regard to shark finning, and struggling to find any contemporary information whatsoever about it, that I decided I was just going to go find out what was happening myself. And with absolutely 0 qualifications, no experience, and no business doing what I did, I just took a small camera and I just started going to these places throughout Southeast Asia and Latin America and even Africa. And before I knew it, I was in triad operations and mafia operations. I had machetes at my throat. I had military chasing me, and an entire life started to unfold that I never intended. But we did start bringing the news up, and we started really creating a new perspective and a very current perspective on what was happening with sharks. And my path has crossed some of the most beautiful people in the world, like Sylvia, Jane Goodall, Rob Stewart was a dear friend of mine. A lot of people in this community, Michael, and this entire community here that have risen into this business of bringing a voice to sharks. And my work now is not just to bring up the dark side of what's happening, but to really put a beautiful, vibrant, inspired face on these animals, because a decade ago, you couldn't do a news story that wasn't about a shark attack. Today, we've managed to shift that, and a lot of the news when they talk about sharks comes back to why they're endangered, and that's due a lot to a lot of the people on this call. Everybody's played a part in that. We have a long way to go. Our shark numbers are massively depleted, and I might just add what we're experiencing right now today. Everybody is not present for each other physically, is a direct result of our sadistic and exploitative treatment of wildlife. In this case, it wasn't sharks. In this case, it was bats, pangolins, and all the other animals that end up in these markets, which I've been in, which are the nightmares you can never imagine, and I still can't get out of my mind. And we knew this was coming. And this virus, on the good side, has connected us all in a very real way. Every single one of us is feeling what we have done to nature. We're feeling it. And I think we're also feeling how the community can come together. So I believe this is a pivotal time for all of us. And I imagine a world where we reset everything. We have a whole new campaign called Extinction Ends Here, and it's going viral right now. And it's time to wake the world up. This is our shot at it. And I believe that each of us here can play a super important role. So I'm really honored to be here with all of you. Count me as a friend, an ally, and any way that you need me to show up, I'll do it, because this is going to take all of us. Thank you, guys.
We appreciate it. And again, another great thing that I have to thank Alex is connecting all the people and connecting it to everyone watching this, because collectively we're all going to have one voice. But you have, Sylvia, Randall, Alex making policy, Mornay, Michael filming it, Mauricio doing research, Sean filming it. I mean, everybody plays. I'm helping connect it and edit it together with my own footage. Someone who's on the front lines who actually tracks down these ships and stops them. And we have footage in my documentary of him ramming up against, he captured a notorious whaling vessel called the Thunder. It was the longest maritime recorded chase, 117 days. He's literally the one out there on the front lines captaining. He's been a captain of the Bob Barker Sea Shepherd. I don't want to give your whole resume, but someone who's literally out there on the seas with Sea Shepherd, going after pirate ships that are doing this illegal fishing, is Captain Peter Hammarstedt. Please say hi, Peter. Thank you for joining.
Thanks very much, Eli. Peter here, joining from Los Angeles, California. I'm the Director of Campaigns for Sea Shepherd Global for the past almost 10 years now. I've had the honor of captaining the Bob Barker. At the moment, we're teaming up with African coastal and island states that have a Coast Guard and a Navy, but maybe doesn't necessarily have the vessels to adequately patrol their waters. And so we provide the ship, we provide the crew, we provide the fuel, and our government partners in Liberia, Gabon, Tanzania, Namibia, Benin, the Gambia, they actually come on board our ships with the authority to board, inspect, and arrest vessels. In the past 4 years, we've assisted these governments to arrest 54 vessels for illegal fishing and other fisheries crimes. That includes ships being arrested for shark finning, vessels being fined for taking sharks as bycatch in the industrial fishing sector. And we also busted a vessel in Liberia that was taking 500,000 sharks every single year for the production of shark liver oil, a vessel that Eli visited together with Sea Shepherd last year. So hoping to talk a bit about that. I am a believer that we need strict legislation, but that needs to be followed up by strong enforcement.
Thank you, Peter. And I think we're waiting for Mauricio to come back on. He must be reconnecting, but joining us is now Andrew Huberman. Finally, welcome, Andrew. I know he's been working with Michael. Andrew, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit
folks.
about
Yeah, can you hear me? Great. So my name is Andrew Huberman, and I'm a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. So basically, I'm a neuroscientist. My lab studies how the brain works, how it changes in response to experience, and we study a lot of tools, and we develop tools for things like stress, PTSD, anxiety, as well as for some more positive, that's all positive in its goals, but also for things like courage, believe it or not, brain circuits that allow us to experience things like courage and positive states. And to be really honest, my introduction to sharks was because of Michael Muller. In 2016, I contacted a friend who was interested in, he studies trauma, and my lab studies the topics I mentioned. And he said, you have to talk to this guy, Michael Muller. He's this, incredible photographer. He also swims with sharks outside the cage. And we had a 2-hour conversation, Michael and I, on a Saturday night. And he came up to my lab, saw what we were doing and how we were trying to deliver these experiences to people in the lab. And he said 2 things that I'll never forget that I think are very relevant to today's discussion. He said, well, they're very scary until you really learn a lot about them and get close to them. And I said, yeah, right. I was a landlocked neurobiologist. And the other thing he said was, there's an enormous amount of destruction of their natural world. And I'm an animal lover, and I care very much about the natural world, and I'm a biologist at heart. So Michael introduced me to shark diving, to I've had the experience of being close to these animals several times now, so I have a deep appreciation and awe and respect for them and for what they do, despite the way humans have treated them over the years. Their determination shows up at every level, and I would become very sensitized to the importance of maintaining their habitats. Mauricio, who I think is going to come back on here, is Mauricio Hoyos, was instrumental in building the collaboration that eventually surfaced between me and Michael. Mauricio, we use sharks and VR footage of sharks in our laboratory, not to frighten people, but to create visual stimuli in virtual reality that are very, that cause a lot of internal state arousal, that shift their brain states. And we're learning now how patterns of breathing can be used to modulate, people can use to modulate their own states, how people would what's called high generalized anxiety, what everyone's experiencing now, perhaps more a little bit with the COVID-19 situation, how they can learn to modulate their brain states. We've partnered with Department of Psychiatry to make some of this build out technologies. And these are all studies that are ongoing. But what I want to say is the real star player in all this has been the sharks themselves. Because even though we look at things like heights and we look at things like claustrophobia and spiders and snakes and all the kinds of things that normally you would think of when you think about phobias and anxiety and fear, the sharks have become such a catch point for teaching people about the brain and about anxiety and anxiety-related conditions and PTSD as things that really emerge from this interaction between our own internal world and these animals in the outside world. And so they've really become they're a big part of the reason people show up in the lab in the first place to be participants in these studies. Because as you can imagine, people with high anxiety and PTSD generally don't sign up for studies on anxiety and PTSD. They tend, and they're the ones that need the help the most. So I'm a real outlier in this conversation today, but I just want to say there are people like myself, laboratories like mine, that are greatly indebted to the conservation efforts, to people at these field stations, to the bigger institutions that supported that work, that allowed us to do, the kind of cage.
Yeah, Mauricio comes in. I want to talk about the dives, because I went out. I missed you on that dive, but I was out there with Michael and Mauricio and Mornay, and it was one of those life-changing experiences at Guadalupe.
Definitely.
And I think that what you're doing, Andrew, and what Michael's doing, putting it in VR, when the technology is there, you'll have that footage that when VR becomes really accessible in the way that we know, it's coming, people will be able to get in the water with the sharks and really see it. But I guess one thing that I want to make sure we get to is, and before when Mauricio comes on, we'll introduce him, is just sort of a general, we don't want to have this turn into like doom and gloom disaster. It's very easy to let your mind go, okay, it's 100 million sharks a year. That's, 12,000 a day, 200 to 300 a minute. It's crazy. And, Mauricio, you joined us. Can you, let's see if you can turn on your microphone and introduce yourself, and then we'll jump into this.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Well, just I will let you know that my name is Mauricio Hoyos. I have been working with sharks since 1998. We started an NGO to protect sharks in Mexican waters, and also we are helping people from other countries like Colombia, Ecuador, Costa Rica. Thank you very much for this invitation.
Thank you, Mauricio. And I just noticed there was another camera, Adam Beal's camera. If you wouldn't mind turning your camera, yes, if you wouldn't mind turning your camera off, just so we could have it be the presenters in the frame. Thank you so much. We love you. We want to hear from you guys. No, if you could just click the camera button off. Yeah, and we can say there's a chat on the right. If you want to write to us, just click the chat bubble, and we're all seeing it. But let's talk about the state of sharks. We keep hearing the number 100 million a year. Not a lot of people in America eat soup made from sharks because it's illegal here, but it's incredible. In Florida, they're just now passing laws about protecting sharks and making shark finning legal. Only 12 states, it's illegal to sell shark fins. We export it. We're still killing sharks. It's totally legal to kill them here. Even though they don't slice the fins off, they now have created secondary markets for meat, which is sold in Publix in Florida. Supermarkets are selling shark meat, which has crazy amounts of mercury in it. You can go to GNC and buy shark pills, shark liver oil, all of which is terrible for you. We had scientists test it. Let's talk about maybe Sylvia or Alex, if you want to lead sort of just the general state of where we are with sharks, what efforts are being done, and kind of how serious is this clock? Are we 10 years from extinction, 15? Without being hysterical, what do you think?
Yeah, let me get Sylvia to comment on that first. I know Sylvia is maybe in a time crunch. She's been pulled in like 12 directions today with different meetings. So I want to be sensitive to Sylvia's time. So maybe Sylvia, you can chime in on that.
I can start, and then I welcome additional comments. Well, what we've been doing in the last few decades is hit some species harder than others. Oceanic whitetip, for example, was once in the Gulf of Mexico said to be the most common shark, and today it's maybe at 1%, maybe less, essentially exterminated from the Gulf of Mexico because of long lines. Some of it was deliberate, some of it incidental, but whatever it is, it's not good news for the white-tip sharks. Some of the smaller deep water sharks are less endangered right now through our actions, but none of them are really safe because we're taking our operations deeper and deeper, and because of what we're putting into the ocean that has a negative effect on life in the ocean, including sharks. That is, like the lost and discarded long lines and nets and other forms of trash, largely plastic, but something on the order of 80% of the plastic debris in the ocean comes from fishing. So a lot of there is concern about illegal fishing currently, but frankly, as one who has been in a position of at NOAA of looking at our country and looking around the world as well at fisheries, I don't know how it is that we've got it in our minds that we should be taking on the scale that we are, on an industrial scale, ocean wildlife that affects sharks disproportionately. Why? Well, sharks have been a big part of the action throughout the history of the ocean. When I began diving, exploring the ocean as a scientist in the 1950s, it was hard to go in the ocean without seeing sharks. Today, it's hard to go in the ocean and see a shark. You have to go to a very deliberate place where you know sharks still have some measure of protection. So the changes that we are now witnessing across the board in the decline of ocean wildlife with sharks as sentinels. People pay attention to sharks in ways they don't necessarily pay to other species, especially the little ones that some don't even have names that we have assigned yet. But
do you have an idea of how long, I mean, till a real extinction of sharks? I mean, the numbers I've heard is that we're at 90% of our populations are gone. Some of the species take 11 to 18 years just to reproduce and reach sexual maturity, and we're pulling out, you know, 273,000 a day.
Yeah,
so how is that gonna? How is it ever gonna sustain? How quickly and what's happening to stop it?
well, here's the thing. We cannot go back to what was. We can make things better than they otherwise would be if we just continue doing what we're doing, and we will cause species to go extinct. There's been that illusion, I've heard it for years, that marine species basically cannot go extinct because the ocean is so big and because the reproduction of creatures in the sea, unlike creatures on the land, it is said, not true, but that's what they say. Anyway, that's the mythology that has worked its way into our policies, that we think that the ocean is infinitely resilient and that species in the ocean will always come back. They won't. I've witnessed the loss, in this case, of a mammal, the monk seal in the Gulf of Mexico that was there until 1952. I was around in 1952. On my watch, the monk seals in the Gulf and Caribbean went away. Well,
And as are going, but are there conservation efforts? I mean, have you seen a shift in the last? I guess what I'm trying to get at is what have you noticed other countries? Do other people care the way we do about this? Because you can start to see the tide turning in. I know in China, there's a whole generation that refuses to have shark. The young kids don't want shark fin soup at their weddings, and they finally just protested Maxime's to stop selling shark fin soup. So there is, a conservation. Randall, I see you here. Like anyone else, I'd love to just know or Sylvia to finish, what's happening.
Yeah, let me just go back for a moment, and then I'll try to be quiet and do more listening and less talking. But we know that we can influence the way people think about sharks, because look at what happened with Jaws. I mean, Peter Benchley, when he wrote Jaws, was just telling us an adventure story. He was not trying to kill sharks or create the attitude that people ultimately acquired about sharks. But if somehow we can make it personal and get to people in the way that it counters what worked to make people fearful of sharks and thinking the only good shark is a dead shark. That actually, if we can get people to understand that the only good shark is a live shark, and
Well,
and
that song
that's what
Baby
we're
Shark.
trying to do, to show and to get across, and I do see that happening. It happened in Finding Nemo, for example. You know, sharks are friends. Fish are friends, not food.
Well, look
It's
at the #1 song in the world. The #1 YouTube video in the world is Baby Shark. I'm sure we've all been tortured by it, but that for children, they don't see them. That's not eating monster. It's mommy shark, grandma shark. Children relate to sharks as a family. And
so
after you hear that song, it's like they're not. So there's a whole generation out there that doesn't have Jaws. And we can start with that next generation,
you got it.
re-educating them.
That's it. And you know, it's that we can learn from our kids, and the kids will set us straight, I hope. But we have to hurry because there are shark species that are in danger of being wiped out totally. And I mentioned the oceanic whitetip is one, but even the great whites,
Great
they're
white
big
basking
and
shark.
tough and all of that, but they're vulnerable. They're vulnerable.
Well, what's
And
crazy is that even there's people should know there's a lot, and again, Sean, I want to hear what you have to say on this too, and Randall. There's a lot. What I found was there's a lot of money by governments that do lobby and control the fishing industry, and CITES is the organization that regulates the trade on these species for people that don't know, and they propose short fin makos to be listed as a threatened, and the Canadians who've banned finning said no, makos are fine. And
they
they
are not.
testify, of course they're not, and they go through their area, but there's so much money that's being bought, like they're bought. Like it's like the oil companies or the gas companies. The same thing happens in the fishing. There's so much money. #1 country, US. #2 country, Japan, spent lobbying the fishing industry so that they can keep killing sharks.
Well,
But
even after that, you know, when CITES came out saying the makos were endangered now, on the NOAA website for at least, probably still now, but probably the last time I checked, for like, you know, 8 months, they were saying the mako was a smart seafood choice. So
I know
even these government
NOAA
regulated,
we have that in the movie. NOAA says that shark protein is a smart food choice. This is the national. And I went to the shark killing tournaments in Boston and I filmed it. And they had NOAA, they would invite NOAA scientists there to collect samples and then use the NOAA scientists to go, well, it's for science, but it's just, it's crazy. Like they're bought. I mean, I'm sorry, but how can you be NOAA and put on your website that it's a seafood choice?
Well, that's a really, we need to hold them accountable. I mean, having been there, but they called me the Sturgeon General because I made such a fuss about the fish. They have a zero accounting base until they're dead. A live fish has to be more valuable than a dead fish, a live shark. I mean, Tommy Ramingasal in Palau gets it by protecting 80% of their exclusive economic zone where no fishing takes place. They're protecting the sharks. We need more large scale,
Well,
fully protected areas where even the sharks, even the tuna, even the shrimp, even the lobsters are safe. I
Well,
mean, it's
the Bahamas is a shark sanctuary where I went diving, and they told me that a shark over its lifetime is worth $250,000 in tourist dollars in diving. Dead, it's $30 one time's use. So you can put a dollar amount in terms of dive tourism. And Sean, what were you going to jump in and say, Sean Heinrichs?
Yeah, it's interesting. Before 2010, there were, I think, 3 species of shark listed on CITES. And I remember when we were trying to, in the 2010 CITES meeting, we were trying to get several species listed, and we made the mistake of bringing up bluefin tuna. And Japan set upon the entire delegation with money and threats, and they shut everything down. Nothing got listed. And it was a real learning experience for me. I was like, wow, we got to do this different. people are not connected to it. We came back in 2013, we got manta rays and a couple of shark species, and now we have close to 40 species listed from 3 in the last 3 sightings. And why does that matter? Well, it matters for this reason, because it has to start somewhere. And if there's nothing protecting them and no rules, there's nothing to attach to. And by at least getting them listed on CITES, which is the Convention on International Trade, you now have stumbling blocks to the movement of those sharks from one country to another. You also have a starting point for a conversation with a government to say, well, what are you doing? And some governments automatically list them under protection, most don't, but it gives a starting point. I think the real risk right now is to sharks, the greatest threat is this argument around sustainable utilization.
Yes.
We are getting sold that somehow an animal that produces a few offspring, maybe every year, but sometimes every other year or third year, and has a biology that is so predetermined to not be exploited by another species, can be harvested. You harvest grain, you don't harvest wild animals. Let's get real. And because of this sustainable utilization argument that is dividing the conservation groups, to be honest, bills to get shark fin trades prohibited in the US, the bill that has been so hard fought by folks like Stephanie Brendel in Florida, constantly hit these stumbling blocks because of this illusion. And so even with our own ranks, we have to get it straight. There is no such thing as sustainable utilization of an animal like a shark.
Listen, Blake, I want to repeat this. I want everyone to hear this, because the biggest, Sean has just boiled it down to the essence of what I encountered making the documentary. There are laboratories that are paid off by the fishing industry. These laboratories will go, let's make it sustainable. 18 years to reach sexual maturity. They have a few pups that take 3 years to reach adulthood, and they're pulling out 300 a minute. It's crazy. Like, please repeat this, Sean. There is no such thing as sustainable shark fishing. It is a joke. There is no reason to have a shark out of a water. The food is poisonous. And also, they keep our ocean clean. That's the other thing we should tell people. We love sharks because they're awesome. They are the doctors of the sea. They are the ones who are eating all the sick and diseased fish. And without sharks, we are going to have poisonous algae blooms that will make beaches unswimmable for everybody. I mean, there's so many things. But I didn't mean to cut you off. But like, if there's one message that comes across that people can amplify, do not listen when someone says it's sustainable. Sorry.
Well,
Let's have Randall speak. Randall has to leave because his mom is in the hospital, and so he has to go see his mom. So let's have Randall say something before he runs off.
Go, Randall.
Okay, yeah, I'll be brief. I'm sorry I have to go. I just want to mention something, and it's just like Sylvia pointed out, and this is something I have to deal with every day with my own fishery institute, and it's that our government authorities are actually the fishermen themselves. And then when you go to the regional fisheries management organizations, you're dealing with a bunch of fishermen. You're not really dealing with scientists or people who know what they're talking about. And the IATTC, the Inter-American Tropical Tuna Commission, great scientific committee, great scientific recommendations, but then you go to the plenary meetings and the tuna fishermen decide to go completely the other way and they don't listen to their own scientists. And the same thing is kind of like happening with CITES. You know, we listed hammerhead sharks and all these other species under Appendix 2, which is supposed to be a hurdle, but our experience after 6 years of hammerhead sharks being under Appendix 2 is it's not a hurdle. It's nothing at all. It's a joke. Nobody's abiding by CITES, and you know, countries are even saying that sharks aren't wildlife, so that they don't have to use their own wildlife conservation laws, and they say sharks are fish, and as fish they're commercial species. They're not wildlife. And then why is this called the Convention for the Trade of International Wildlife? So I'm taking my own government to court over this. Unfortunately, we have to do this a lot, but that's one of the core problems. And if we want to have one of our solutions, at least, if we can at least ban all international commerce by Appendix 1 listings that everybody is afraid of, but that's what's going to work. It worked for the turtles in the 90s. Again, remember, I'm a turtle biologist. And if we can start getting sharks, starting with hammerhead sharks on Appendix 1 and the oceanic white-tip sharks, then we can start moving on. But the only solution here is stop killing so many sharks. Thank you, everybody.
Before you go, after you go, please, I want you to leave with Alex that we can post on social where everyone can support you, because we want to be, however the public can get behind you. You don't have to do it now. we will post on social because it's so important that we amplify the message of what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. We're planning on leading a campaign for listing hammerhead sharks on Appendix 1 in CITES in 2022. So we're going to need everyone's help because believe it or not, we don't even have the whole scientific community behind us on this one. So we really got to organize, and we got to, we're going to have to really push for this one.
We're going to. We'll get everyone. Thank you,
Could-
Randall.
Could I
Peter.
just weigh in and endorse what you're saying, Randall? Because, as long as we continue to look at fish as commodities across the board, to look at wildlife in the ocean as seafood, that anything out there that swims or even if it crawls or whatever, it's seafood, we have to change the mindset. And I really applaud you for your insight in what you're doing. And yes, we need to support you in every way we can. We're trying with Mission Blue. We certainly celebrate and working with you. We need to protect more of the ocean, flat out, but we also need to look at the underlying concepts. Creatures of the sea, they are wildlife. I don't care what they say in the law. Just
100 years ago, whales were monsters, and 50 years ago, the world banded together to save them. In the 90s, it was sea turtles. Now
Right.
it's then we did it with dolphins. Now it's time for sharks.
and tuna.
And tuna.
And
Tuna, buying all the tuna.
Okay, well, I got to go, but respect to everybody. Thank you, Eli. Thank you, Alex. And thank you, Sylvia. It's always such a pleasure to speak to you. Always so inspiring.
Peter Hammerstedt, what were you going to say? Because I know you've been on the front lines of this.
The reason that the whole sustainability argument is absurd is that look at the figures we use within the conservation movement. Look at the range. We say that between 63 million and 273 million sharks are killed every single year. We don't know. Ask the experts at Interpol or the Office on Drugs and Crime at the United Nations how much of the global fishing effort is illegal fishing, and they'll say between 15 to 40%. Right? So there's a huge unknown number affecting sharks. And one of the biggest components of that is within the industrial fishing sector. Every single industrial tuna vessel engaged in purse seine fishing that I've boarded in the Atlantic catches about between 10 and 20 sharks in every hauling of tuna that they do. And out of those 10 and 20, about 90% die. These figures are largely unaccounted for. Go to the European Commission and ask how many sharks are killed in the tuna fishery in the Atlantic every year, and that number is as close to zero as you can get. You can't manage what you can't measure. And the reality is that shark populations are plummeting. We don't actually know exactly how bad the situation is. So we have to use the precautionary principle and assume that it's catastrophic.
And it's true with tuna too. Their numbers are catastrophically low. And it's the job of a species to reproduce itself basically. And so there are a lot of little tuna and not many sharks, but the recipe for survival is the same. The vast number of small tuna get eaten by everybody else out there, and maybe one or two will make it to reproduce to be big mama and papa tunas. This with sharks, they care, you start out as a pretty capable creature that is less vulnerable than a baby tuna for sure. But in any case, we just need to change the way we think about life in the ocean as commodities. And it's the legal fishing that I worry about even more than I do about the legal fishing, because we have this mindset that it's okay.
That it's okay because it's legal. And it's also, these are groups that have paid a lot of money. And look, Peter and I go into, there's mafias involved. Organized crime, people that are trafficking drugs. It's bad. So it's a whole mix. One thing I'd like to ask the group, and there's this feeling that we all feel powerless against big fishing, against big government, against giant ships. What have you guys found? Two things I want to do, and then I want to kind of move on a little bit more into sharks themselves. What have you guys found that's effective? What works against this? How do we stop? How can everyone who feels like, well, I'm not a fisherman, I'm not a politician, but I have a voice and I have dollars, and my dollars can be spent. How can we use our dollars and our voice if you are sitting, we're all sitting at home on our computer, to make an impact? What have Sean, anyone, what have you guys found? What works? What's good?
Actually, maybe Mauricio, why don't you talk to that and let us know what Mexico has done? Because Mexico, over the last several years, has done incredible work to create more protected areas. I mean, they still got a long way to go, but they've done some incredible work and linking the science to use the science to drive the conservation.
Yeah. So the main problem in Mexico was the lack of information. So that's why a lot of scientists, we started to gather as much information as possible in order to give the Mexican government the tools they need to protect these animals. A very good example is Revillagigedo Archipelago. Every island, there are 4 islands in that archipelago, and they were protected just 12 miles around each island. And thanks to the information that we found about the connectivity of the islands, the Mexican government was able to protect the archipelago in a way bigger area. So now it's protected like 40,000 kilometers square. And also we are trying to find out information about the connectivity of these sharks, because we found that there's connectivity between the islands, but now we are finding that these animals, they do not respect human boundaries. So they are taking long migrations to other areas. And now we have records of sharks from Revillagigedo going to Clipperton, which is France, and also to Galapagos. We are about to publish that paper. So I think that gathering all this information is very important in order to give the different nations the tools they need to protect these beautiful and majestic animals.
I would love to know, from one of the things that I've tried to tell people on a completely sort of different, sort of related subject, I didn't realize that sharks were like dogs and they have personalities. And that was when I went in the water with them. I know we name sharks, but being in the water, I'd love to hear Mauricio, Paul, Sean, Peter, Sylvia, Mike, Michael, you guys, Mornay, what are some of the things you've noticed about, I mean, the perception, you know, the trailer for Jaws, and again, not to bag on Jaws, because I do think it's the people eating soup as a luxury item is what's driving this. It's not, we're not going to blame Jaws for the shark problem, but the perception that these are monsters and they're going to eat you when you go in the water, I found that it's like being in a dog pen with a bunch of dogs. I'd love to hear some stories for people that have never been in the water with a shark or that are afraid to. What are they like? Anyone can jump in, just unmute.
Well, they're innocent.
Well, I wouldn't say that it's like getting into a pen with a bunch of dogs. Maybe depends on the
personalities and not being so reptilian and monstrous.
Absolutely, as everyone who has dove down at Tiger Beach will know, especially the tiger sharks and the hammerheads, especially the tiger sharks, they all have different personalities, and some of them are more well known than others. But they're a dog that you don't want to turn your back on, because they'll creep up behind you and they'll take a bite. So getting across to people that no, they're not anything like dogs. Do not treat them like a pet. Do not treat them like dogs. Only touch them when you have to redirect them and push them away. Things like that. They need to be respected. They need to be not thought of as these cuddly little things. The tawny nurse sharks out there, obviously, they mob you and you can't really do anything about it. But they're not gonna kill you. They don't even have any teeth. But we need to move away from this perception from the local, somewhere in the middle. Some people are terrified of these sharks and they won't even put their feet in the water, to other people thinking, oh, they're just puppies. Look at these people on Shark Week and all that sort of stuff. So if we can meet somewhere in the middle where it's like, okay, have a healthy respect and don't let that broach into the fear aspect of it, and just, like they're meant, as everyone's been saying, they're meant to be there. They need to be there. Let's not destroy them.
They're cautious. Some were friendly. Some were different. Mauricio, you're with great whites all the time. What personalities have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. In Guadalupe, we have identified up to 300 sharks, and you can identify them by the pigmentation patterns of their body or the conspicuous characteristics in their body also. But sometimes you can tell what shark it is just because of their behavior. It's amazing that every single animal, they are totally different. I mean, there's a beautiful female, her name is Bella, and she's very nice. She comes very gentle. But there's another one that is called Mao. I named that shark after me, like Mauricio, because it's a juvenile, but it's very aggressive and it's always pushing away the older sharks. So amazing that I have seen that every single shark in Guadalupe, they have their own personality.
That's
Sean,
good.
Mike, Coots, I'm sure you see that.
Yeah.
Mike, you go ahead. I'll jump after you.
Okay. Yeah, Mauricio and Paul nailed it. I think diving with sharks, you really realize that sharks do have personalities, individual personalities, even in the same species. And I think as a storyteller, that's what I try to convey, whether that is, a smile, the smirk on a shark. I think if we can see a bit of those personalities, I know Hollywood and especially Jaws has done a really good job of trying to make sharks like these mindless killers that have no soul, have no life, with their dark eyes. You dive your sharks, you see a lot of light. And I think if we can share that side of sharks, it personify sharks, and it makes us want to learn more about them.
Well,
Yeah. Eli, could I say something?
Yeah, of course, please, Mornay.
Have you got me? Yeah, my opinion about it is, 20 years ago, shark diving wasn't even a thing. It was like base jumping. It was only for the crazy people. And the difference between where we were 20 years ago and the difference where we are now is only comes down to knowledge. And the knowledge came out of fear. So, we talk about Jaws and everything. Obviously, Peter Benchley didn't mean for the negative side of it to happen. That's just the human psyche. But, it did raise awareness about sharks, which we have been able to turn around into a positive over the last, I'd say probably shark diving in general for divers only really started maybe 15 years ago. And, when I started with white sharks. I didn't even really look at different sharks because it was just about, everything was about white sharks. But the more I learned about them and the more I got into their behavior and learned about them, it was a fascination that grew, and I wanted to learn more about them. And the only way you could do that is by spending more time with them. And that is now the knowledge that we are giving to different people. And this way we're fostering appreciation in more people for sharks than that was before.
You lead
the
those
problem
guys.
isn't really, I think the problem isn't really, the problem for sharks isn't really the normal people like us that's passionate about sharks. We share all our stuff on social media about how awesome they are, and everybody's commenting on our stuff going, sharks is amazing. It comes down to legislation. It comes down to government, and it comes down to government doesn't want, in South Africa we got massive problems with things because we got poverty and we got all different kinds of problems here. But government, I've learned that they don't want you to bring them a problem, they want you to bring them a solution. So, in my opinion, the only way we're really going to make big changes is that everybody needs to stand together, and we need to take government solutions and not problems.
Well, I think I completely agree. I've seen that. I didn't know this, but the fish and chips in Australia, they call it Flake, but it's made from shark. So you're eating shark. So
Yeah.
And I went with Peter, showing me all the different foods that are mislabeled as shark. It's shark meat that's sold in supermarkets. They'll call it ocean whitefish, Flake. There's all these different, all these crazy different names, but you're eating shark. So really, one thing we should say is that Peter Benchley did become a huge shark conservationist at the end of his life. He said if he had known of what this would have caused, he would have never written the book. But the problem is that the new money in China, they started doing the gimmick of eat soup that the emperor ate in the year, from the year 800. They started selling the soup as a wedding gimmick. Shark fin soup has no taste. It's cartilage. It's like eating a fingernail or fishing line. You have to flavor it with chicken stock or pork to get it to even have a taste. And it's bleached. It's so toxic for you and so poisonous. So it does feel like something we all can do. The only way to keep if sharks aren't worth anything, they'll stop trading them. The fins are killed and the sharks are sold because the liver oil is used in health products, it's used in moisturizer, it's used in makeup. The shark skin, the teeth are sold, the cartilage, all of this nonsense science that was started by this asshole who wrote this book called Sharks Don't Get Cancer, which was fake science written in 1992 to coincide with the launch of his shark supplement products that he fucking sold. Sorry, he like this guy. So we all go into GNC and we think, oh, this is great. I'm taking shark cartilage. I won't get cancer. It's completely a lie. The guy was not a scientist, and it causes crazy inflammation. So one thing that you're saying, Mornay, the government solution is part of it, but at a consumer level, everybody can in some way stop buying shark products, and when they see them, make us think about it. I'm rambling. I don't even know what the question is.
I'd like to jump in here on something which is super
goodbye.
important. Oh,
Wait, Sean. Wait, sorry, Sylvia.
Sylvia.
Okay, I just have to say goodbye and thank you for letting me be part of the action. I wish I
Thank you,
could
Sylvia. And link it to Alex so we know where people can follow you to support everything you're doing. It's incredible.
It's Mission Blue.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Thank you, Sylvia.
It's marketing. Market the truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Sean, you were saying?
Yeah, I've been working on shark legislation for about 15 years across the Pacific. We did a bunch of shark. We probably have about 10 million miles that we got under shark sanctuaries, 10 million square miles. And I've worked with legislation in Indonesia and Peru. I've helped support a lot of the state legislation across the US for stuff. All of that's really important. There's an elephant in the room here, which is something that made sharks incredibly successful throughout 400 million years and have made them tragic failures in the last 50 years, which is they get there first, they get there fast, and they bite. And as a result, the methods that we use for fishing right now, commercial fishing methods, sharks don't know they're protected. They don't know that now there's a law to protect them. If there's a hook in the water with bait on it, if there's a gill net, if there's a purse seiner, they're still getting them. And fishermen don't want to lose a 50 cent, $1 hook. So they whack them in the head with a machete and they throw them overboard if they don't keep them. So you end up with a dead shark, better to feed the ecosystem, but it's still a dead shark. So how do we make a difference? Well, we have to accept that every single one of us, if we, and either now or at some point in our lives, has been complicit in this. If you eat any commercially caught tuna that isn't Pollan line whatsoever, you're eating sharks. Bumblebee, you name it, you're part of the problem. We're all part of the problem. If you are supporting any of the fisheries that are getting them in the gill nets, if you are eating fish and chips, if you are eating flake, if you're eating a fish that you don't know what it is, and it's called whitefish, you may be part of the problem. That ownership goes to every single one of us. And so how do we fix something if everybody's a part of it? If you eat chicken, if you eat a lot of meat, 40% of the fish coming out of the oceans is going to feed animals on Earth, physical terrestrial animals. So it's our diets, it's what we consume that is causing this problem. So if we want to change it, we got to get the hooks out of the water, we got to get the gill nets out of the water, we got to get the purse seines out of the water, we've got to massively reduce our consumption of these products, because if we don't, we're going to still lose all the sharks.
And I think that's such a good point. And I want to ask you sort of what social campaigns, like how we can tell the stuff is sustainable. But Peter, I know you've been very involved in this. And you want to jump in?
Well, there was a big push in the 1980s to get dolphin-safe tuna because purse seiners were deliberately setting their purse seine nets on pods of dolphins, knowing that they had a symbiotic, or they have a symbiotic relationship with tuna. Now, most of the fishing that's happening is on fish aggregation devices, these essentially floating fish magnets. And since these FADs attract juvenile fish, they also attract shark. So we may have moved towards more or less dolphin-safe tuna, although more than 50,000 dolphins are still being killed in the tuna industry, but there's certainly no such thing as shark-safe tuna. I've seen dead sharks on shrimp trawlers. I've seen dead sharks on tuna boats. The reality is, if you're consuming fish, then you are consuming sharks. And people watching this or listening to this, they're not going to go out and buy shark fin soup anyway, right? So telling them not to buy shark fin soup isn't going to make a difference. What we can say is, don't eat fish.
Well, here's the thing. So there are some people that are going to do that, and there are some people that are going to go, oh, this is turning into some vegan. Like, you know, there is like an eye rolling. By the way, certainly when you're in Hollywood and you say anything about me, people just go, you know, they're like, they tune you out right away. So in terms of practical, to say that, look, that's, you're correct, and I'm not arguing against you. But for people that are eating fish, is there a way, we go into a restaurant, you order a piece of fish, we don't think of ourselves as killing. It's, you know, somehow there's this inherent trust that we have with the restaurants that what we're eating is okay and safe and has been regulated and is sustainable. Is there truly any way, other than eating locally sourced, like what are some things that people can do just to be aware of when they go and do order a piece of fish?
I can
Or is
answer
there
that.
nothing?
Yes. If you use methods that catch one fish, one hook, most likely you're probably not impacting sharks that much. It's the mass methods. It's the trawlers, the shrimp trawlers, the gill netters, the longliners, the purse seiners, all these large-scale indiscriminate fishing methods. Could you imagine if the Serengeti, people would go down there, take a big net, drag all the animals up, and then start picking out, I want an elephant and this? That would last about a day and the world would be in uproar. But it's happening by tens of thousands of vessels every single day in the oceans. We are apathetic about the means by which we're catching our fish. And so, yeah, I mean, ideally, we would reduce to the point of almost no consumption. Let's say that takes a long time or that doesn't happen. We have to dramatically change how we catch fish if we're going to do that. And it used to be a guy would go out on a boat, drop a little hook in the water, pull up his fish and go feed his family. And that wasn't a big deal. In fact, that was native and probably more sustainable than a bunch of packaged food coming out of Whole Foods. That has not been the case for most of the developed world for quite some time. So it comes down to traceability, and that comes down, you know, we have Monterey Seafood Card, we have Fishwise, we have a number of groups that are doing great work. The only issue with that is if you follow the trends, it goes green, yellow, red. It's like it was green and now it's yellow and tomorrow it's going to be red. So you're just trying to sort of keep ahead of it. It's because you have to dramatically change how you catch it. Until we do that, we're all going to be sitting here 10 years from now going, what happened to the sharks?
Yeah, well, I think that one of the things that I learned was that World War II, that all the ships, that's where all of these ships were basically refitted after World War II for fishing. They were used for killing, and that's sort of the last 50 years why there's been such an explosion. One question I want to ask, because I know we don't have much time left, is anything happening positive in the ocean with the shutdown? Is there any effect with the restaurants being closed? Or are the boats still out there catching and just freezing it and we don't know about it? What have you guys seen? Do the fish are the sharks getting a chance to take a breath and repopulate? Peter, yeah?
What we have seen is that a lot of the local trawlers, the national fleets, are staying in port, but these big super trawlers that can stay out at sea for months and months at a time, sometimes even up to years, they're still staying out at sea and catching fish. I think if the COVID-19 leads to a big global recession, then we may have a similar situation to what we had in the post-war years after the Second World War, where in the North Atlantic, cod actually came back in a big way after the Second World War. But it depends. After this, if there is a global recession, obviously that will turn at some point. And the question is then, will we have learned our lessons from the past, or will we exploit things to a whole different level?
I might also add right now, I have contacts and I'm working with communities in Southeast Asia, and the marine parks are getting hammered because the poachers don't care. And so what once were sacred areas protected for 15 years have 3 industrial fishing boats on the top dive sites. There's no divers, there's no police. So it's terrifying, 15 years lost in a few months.
They're just going right,
oh, yeah.
Like obviously they're criminals. They're just going to the protected areas because no one's protecting them, and they're just sucking them dry.
They're hitting it hard.
Any awareness of the citizens, or can we have, I mean, you know, you want to take drones and send missiles and blow them up, but is there anything that people can do? I mean, you feel helpless against this.
There's groups that are looking to support the communities, but if the communities themselves are starving, they don't even have the resource to feed themselves, let alone take on the poachers. And instead, everyone's huddling in their places, which is what we've been told to do. But the money, the tourism dollars that support these marine protected areas and these parks and national parks in Africa, that money has dried up. And so they're going in the parks themselves, the people who are tasked with protecting it. But even worse, there's no one there to stop the poachers. So we have a huge situation. You know, people talk about nature is breathing right now. No, maybe here in some of the places we're talking from, but there's a large percentage of the world where it is not breathing in the slightest. In fact, it's getting hammered. And we have to wake up to that fact, and we need to send dollars, financial support, to the very places that are tasked with protecting these last great places. If we don't, we're going to come out of this to a very empty naturescape.
Well, Sean, what you're saying, it would be great if at the end of this and whenever this video is edited, you could provide, you know, different feeds, places we could follow, Twitters, links, organizations, because I think people do want to help, and they do. You know, obviously when people are starving and losing their jobs, you know, they're not thinking about animals, but there are a lot of people that do want to help in some way. So any way you can help us amplify that, because what you just told me is something I was completely unaware of, and it's terrifying, but it makes sense.
I think a large part is it's a failing of governments, right? We all know governments don't know how to control things. But in their experience in Central South America is that, you know, when Randall and I were out there and we're saying, you know, you've got to stop the shrimp trawlers. You know, Randall sued the government, got rid of the shrimp trawlers in Costa Rica, and now the local artisanal fishermen are seeing a rebound in the snapper population that they're catching, right? So it's kind of like a success story to the extent where you remove one very destructive fishing practice and you see a positive effect happening. Well, the shrimp trawlers said, you know, you're just trying to take our livelihood away. Well, give us something else to do. Give us something else to do. Well, why is it always our responsibility to find another livelihood for these fishermen that are destroying the oceans? Where is the role of the government in that situation to find another economic avenue for these fishermen so that they're not destroying the planet? So I think it's a failing of government. And Peter, to your sense, I don't think we'll ever learn. You think we'll learn from our past mistakes?
Well,
History has shown time and time again, we never learn.
Well, but there are, everyone on this chat, you know, all the 115 people and everyone who's watching this does care, and we do want to do something. We had one question that got sent in from Nathan Stilling. He said, I'm 8 years old. I want to be a marine geologist and save sharks when I'm older. Marine biologist, I think he meant. Is there anything I can do now to protect sharks so they don't go extinct? Which is a lot of questions I'm seeing in the chat of, you're an average person. I mean, we've talked about checking with the sustainable single line fishing. I've talked about not buying products at GNC of any kind, or any place that vitamin that sells any kind of shark related product. It shouldn't be. We got to discontinue those. When you see on the East Coast these monster shark fishing tournaments, look at who's sponsoring them. I saw that a lot of banks, a lot of sports teams, Bass Pro Shops, a lot of these places, they don't realize they're going there. They think it's a charity tournament or fishing. It's not. They're not aware. The sponsors often are not aware. They're going after endangered sharks. What are some suggestions from you guys? Very simple, practical things that anyone can do to help protect sharks.
I would say, obvious, like we just spoke, you know, don't consume shark fin soup, careful where your fish comes from, all those things. But I would just look and see what your talents are. If you're a good writer, spend your time writing. Write opinion editorial pieces to the newspaper, write to the sponsors of the shark fishing tournaments. If you're really social, create social groups that love the ocean and want to talk about it. Everybody's got a unique talent that really nobody can else replicate. Find that and run with it. You're 8 years old. The world literally is your oyster. Find out what you enjoy, what your talents are, and go for it.
I think that's a really good point, that everyone has a very particular talent, whether it's photography, whether it's filmmaking, whether it's science, whether it's writing, whether it's on camera, whether it's leading a captain of a ship, like whatever your talent is, you can apply it to some kind of conservation. Someone was.
I'm going to chime in real quick, just because that kid that, you know, that just wrote in, you know, he's 8 years old. The majority of work I do is exactly for him. I don't hold a lot of regard for our generation. It's his generation, it's their generation that are inheriting what we're giving them. And you know, I grew up watching Cousteau, which, you know, I saw on TV, the ocean. I was like, oh my God, that exists. There's things like that I want to go out and see. Like Sean had brought up, I didn't want to accept that, you know, oh, I have to be vegan and can't eat meat or fish. But the reality is that, you know, this COVID thing it's going to be a walk in the park compared to the climate crisis that we're facing. And the majority of the climate crisis, if you really look at it, comes from the livestock, the food that we're eating. You know, they are slaughtering the Amazon so they can put cows that are, you know, gas is going, I mean, it just goes on. It's sort of a domino effect. And if you don't want to go full vegan, there's a thing called balance. So, you know, if you really still want to eat meat, maybe eat meat once a week or once a month, but it's all about supply and demand. So if we can educate, and it's like my daughters, they're pretty much, they don't eat meat. There's a lot of substitutes now. And if we can educate this next generation that like, hey, we're sorry you're getting this planet the way it is, but here are some ways that we can help curb, you know, this crisis. And one of them is your diet, and mostly because if people aren't, you know, eating meat or eating fish, then we're not killing the sharks. So, you know, we have this group here, and that was one of the things. It's like we all of us on this call want to help sharks, want to help the ocean. So if, you know, maybe after this call we can collectively go like, hey, let's all come together and make a campaign to, I don't know, educate kids about that or do something. We have a lot of power to do that. So. Yeah, that's just my little note, is that, you know, it's their generation that can come in. They're the new politicians, and they're the really, I think.
We saw it with your daughter, and it's, you know, I think that
Michael.
Beautiful, Michael. I mean, and you know, shark tourism is an amazing thing, and I really believe in it. I mean, I do think that it's a safe way, you know, like we protect what we know and what we love, and you fall in love with it. And I didn't go in, I mean, it was maybe 2015. It was 4 years ago that I went in. And going in the water with them, it is a difference if you go in the water and you come out different. And the money that's raised, it's the people that run the boats, that run the dives, that run it, really do love the ocean. They're the ones that are careful. They're the ones protecting. It does help support those local communities. And like when I was in Guadalupe, there's only 7 boats allowed, and they're very careful with the sharks. Like it's really well regulated in, you know, for the most part. So I think that if these areas I know Shark Girl Madison is trying this in Indonesia, Reggie Domingo is trying it in Mexico. Really, a lot of the shark fishing villages, there's one village in Mexico called Cabo Pulmo. And Cabo Pulmo was a shark fishing village, and the family flipped to shark tourism, and it exploded. They are now one of the most incredible. The biodiversity came back, the biomass. Right next to Cabo Pulmo, adjacent, is a beach called Los Frailes, which is still a shark fishing beach, and they're almost decimated. There's almost nothing left. And so there's Reggie Domingo has been trying to work with the communities to help them turn. So when you do shark tourism, it actually supports the local people. It gets in, but what you're really doing is you're educating a new generation of spokespeople that are out there that can really help, you know, explain. I mean, you look at in New Bedford, Massachusetts, they killed whales, and that's such a crazy idea to think that you need to kill a whale for oil now. So I do think that shark tourism is a great way. Go ahead, Sean.
I just got to drop off now. I've got a call in 1 minute.
Yeah, I
just want to say thank you so much, everybody. You guys are amazing.
Thanks, Sean.
Community.
Thanks, Sean.
I love you all. And the one thing I say we can all do is show up for your community. Actually show up. Don't be apathetic. There's already amazing people, you guys, the gals, all of them that are doing incredible work. If we just showed up for each other a little bit more beautifully and a little bit more, oh my God, we'd be so much more powerful. So let's all just show up a bit more and support each other, because we're all doing great stuff. So I'm proud of you all. Thank you, and thank you for.
And let us know about you posting your campaigns, how we can all amplify everything you're doing, because you're doing incredible work on the frontline societies. We all want to help.
Yep.
Joined with Sea Legacy, sealegacy.org, and we have a crazy amount of campaigns all around this. So join us, and we'll join you together.
Thanks.
Thank you, Sean.
Let me
guys.
thanks, Sean. You know, let me follow up. You know, the shark tourism thing is a big core component to what Fins Attached does, right? You know, we bought this little panga, 134-foot panga, like 3 years ago, because I saw the writing on the wall, along with my colleagues, of what was going on with sharks around the world, and felt we need to accelerate the effort to get the data that is needed like Mauricio was saying, to give to the government so that they have something to base their decisions on. And the biggest challenge that scientists have is actually getting out in the field to get the work done, getting the resources, having the platform to get the work done is a major, major stumbling block for these scientists. And I've experienced that in the old Eastern Pacific area from Mexico all the way down to the Galapagos. So to have a platform like Sharkwater, and unfortunately, a true conservationist friend, Rob Stewart, is no longer with us, but we named our research vessel Sharkwater after his original film in his honor. We're helping to keep his legacy going with the vessel. But Sharkwater is there to support scientists, but it's also there to give experiences to the public. So we conduct what we refer to as these citizen scientist expeditions, where people come with us, they help fund the project, but they get to have hand-on experience on the project as well. So I think citizen scientists creating value for sharks as a living resource is a more powerful tool for governments to protect them, because if it means millions and millions of dollars to the local economies, they're more likely to protect something than not.
It's true. It's true. I mean, if they only realized, I was in New Bedford, Massachusetts, watching them hauling in all these dead sharks, thinking if these boats understood how much people would pay just to be in the water with them, and it's sustainable and it supports the local economy, and there's every reason in the world to do it. But I think that the expeditions you're leading, Mauricio, what you're doing, Michael, everything, Paul, Mike, Peter, it's really, everyone's hitting it from all sides, but we all have the same core mission. And the crazy thing is that the sharks are there to protect us. They keep our waters healthy. They keep, without sharks, there'd be an overabundance of parrotfish and grouper that would lead to explosive poisonous algae blooms that would suffocate. It's the trophic cascade effect of losing the sharks is crazy, and it'll suffocate the oceans and make them basically toxic, covered in algae and unusable by anybody. So sharks, I just want to say, I know we have to wrap up here fairly soon. I don't know if anyone has any last things that we want to say or stuff we didn't get to, but it's really been a pleasure to hear everyone and to see all of you guys in the chat, because otherwise, look, we're out there doing this, but you're all doing, it's equally as important. Everybody's voice matters. So thank you. Any last things anyone wants to say?
Yeah, thanks, Eli. Thanks to all the panel for your support and efforts and work that you're doing. Thank you to the audience. We do want to empower the audience. Every little bit that everyone does adds up to big things as a collective group, right? So don't think that, oh, my one little thing is not going to help, so why bother kind of attitude. So we need to have the attitude that my little bit will add to my friend's little bit, will add to their little bit, and eventually we have this huge movement going forward that's going to have an incredible impact and effect on positive change for the whole planet. So thank you, everyone.